streamlined.
Thank you very much, Alan, and let me add my welcome to everyone here today. So, as you've heard, my focus is going to be on the economic policy work that we're doing under this banner of the National Long-Term Tourism Strategy. I'm not going to go into this in great detail. You know the structure of this strategy is work of all of the 9 tourism ministers of Australia and the 9 governments. It's supported by committee of officials, which, as Helen said, I'm privileged to chair, that comprises the heads of all of the state, territory and tourism organisations and, of course, TA. And we've organised ourselves into a number of working groups around the themes. Last year, I went through each of those 9 working groups and told you what we're doing under each of them and why. This year, I want to give you more of an overview report of where we've got to and where it's going next. I want to do that in 3 levels. I want to talk about some of the broader policy work that we've been doing and the research that I flagged last year and where that's got to. Then I want to talk about some whole-of-industry outcomes. And finally, I want to talk about the things that are affecting individual businesses, that businesses are reaching out and touching and engaging with. So first, some of the policy work. The supply side agenda to function effectively, it has to be underpinned by good policy evidence. We can't just assert the need for these things, we have to have the evidence. Here's some of the key things that we've done over the last year. We've completed the largest ever tourism labour force survey, really focusing on where are the regional gaps and where are the skills gaps, and you'll hear more about that this afternoon. We've completed a major study on what is stopping investment in new tourism facilities, accommodation, attractions, etc. A lot of work around where are those barriers and what are the regulatory reforms that are needed to knock them over. We've completed a National Tourism Planning Guide and released that to industry. We've updated the National Tourism Incident Communications Plan, informed by the experience of the Queensland floods and cyclone and the Victorian bushfires. That's recognition that these things are going to happen again and we just need to be better prepared. We've done a lot of work on the priorities for Australia's bilateral aviation links. You saw some of the results in Andrew's presentation earlier. It's emphasised that we need to continue our focus in China, Europe, Indonesia, Malaysia, Brazil, and so on. And finally, the National Tourism Accreditation Framework has been launched. 6 programs are now accredited, covering some 15,000 companies. The linkage that Andrew mentioned to TripAdvisor will be very important in taking that to the next level. Take it down a notch now to some more industry-specific outcomes. The tourism research agenda is now much more aligned to industry needs than I think it has been in the past. On the Tourism Research Board that I chair, the industry representatives are now saying, look guys, this is what we want, this is what we need from the research area, and that's what we want, that direct engagement. The National Online Tourism Strategy has released this tourism e-kit, following a survey of some 2,000 tourism businesses to understand where they're at online. The good news, online presence is as high as 84%. The not so impressive number, only a third have online booking and payment facilities. More work needed. We've launched the TCOL brand to industry, and that's going to build. That's a good start, but a long burn. Enterprise Connect, the Prime Minister announced just last week at the Future Jobs Forum that the Enterprise Connect program that was currently available in Queensland will be rolled out to the tourism sector nationally. There's funding for hotels to undertake capital works around energy efficiency, and, as the Minister has talked about, expanding the Pacific seasonal worker pilot scheme. To take it down one level even further, to talk about where our industries, businesses, touching, getting a feel for what we're delivering. The TCOL grants program has been rolled out, $8.5 million of grants so far, and 2 large strategic investment grants addressing China and Indigenous each of up to 1 million, and they're currently in the development and assessment stage. Access to other grants has also been provided for the tourism sector. Air capacity, real visitors on seats. Seat allocation by 2012, China a 50% increase, Indonesia a 250% increase in weekly seats. I've mentioned the EKID. The government has removed on regulatory reform the requirement for menus to have a component pricing area. We estimate that's going to save $22 million a year for industry. And as a result of the night review, we're looking at streamlining student visas with more attractive post-study work conditions. Now, this is perhaps the key slide that I wanted to talk about today. Having said last year we're going to do a lot of things, having given you a quick walk through what we have done, we really need to be quite hard-nosed about how this strategy is rolling out. So here's our spot, and this is informed not just by us sitting around scratching our heads, but some research that we've done within industry as well about how industry is perceiving our work on this strategy. Strengths. We're very confident that the supply side focus, the microeconomic reform focus is accepted, is robust, is solid, and is clearly a strength of this strategy. The government role in this sector is more than the demand side. The demand side is necessary, but the supply side is critical. We have achieved a higher level of state and federal government cooperation under this banner than without such a strategy, and industry has very actively engaged in the working groups. And some good progress has been made, as I've outlined. Weaknesses. Well, it is the case that the bulk of the work in the first year has been in that policy, research, analytical stage. That doesn't deliver customers at the door. My view, it's a necessary underpinning of it, but we understand there's some frustration with that. That results, I think, in industry sometimes thinking that the work under this strategy is government talking to itself. You know, when am I going to see some results? We recognise that that's a frustration. And I don't think we've been very good in communicating what we've been doing to industry as well. There's clearly room to do better in that area. So that's one of the opportunity points. We can explain the fundamentals that we're working on better to industry. We are seeing in industry the big players in the sector wanting to engage more, wanting to see more progress. There's a lot of positive messaging there. And we can continue to knock down this fragmented approach across the jurisdictions in Australia. So a lot of opportunity also. Threats, as a result of our communication on this, or the difficult messaging that we've had, we're probably at a fragile stage. If we don't get the messaging right on what we're doing in the strategy, there is a risk that we'll lose industry support. I think that's manageable. We're committed to doing it. We know what we need to do. We just need to get on with it. And finally, as ever, there is the threat of an external event being a real knock to the industry. The devastating impact that ministers have talked about with cyclones, floods, fires, etc., things outside our control. Overall, I guess my sense is that the strengths and opportunities are bigger. The glass is much more than half full in this area, but we have to be realistic about the perceptions and the realities of how we're going. The State of the Industry report that Tourism Research Australia released last week is part of this theme of being realistic and hard-nosed in our assessment of where is the industry at and what needs to be done. This is probably, to my mind, the single most important graph in that report. It shows that there's been some real bright spots in the industry, along with the dealing with challenging conditions that have been talked about. The ones that we've marked, this assessment of green, amber and red is how are these indicators tracking towards delivering the 2020 potential that Andrew outlined earlier. The brightest green are the air capacity, domestic and international, a fundamental driver and looking very solid. The ambers that we've put there on the right-hand side, labour, we all understand that our survey results have confirmed. We understand that there are still some significant challenges in labour. It's grown, but there are both skill and supply shortages in there. International visitors and domestic trips, the two areas on the left, 6% and 4% growth. I mean, growth, great, but we wanted more. We need more if we're going to get the potential. So, good that they're above the line, but we can't be complacent about that by any means. The two red lights, of course, are the stark reality of what's been happening in our sector over the last year. International spend and domestic spend, that all-important number, have not grown, and that's the brutal reality that we need to keep working on. Accommodation capacity sitting there at virtually no growth. There are some good indicators around that, which I'll come to in a moment. Good forecasts, I should say. What about the future then? So that's looking backwards over the last 18 months. What are we currently seeing looking at the crystal ball? So here's the work of the Tourism Forecasting Committee just released in the last couple of weeks. And their current assessment out to 2020. So this is all indexed off 2010 nominal 100. And the key point there, of course, you see, is this growth in business travel and in the sector, much higher, that's the blue line, much higher than the holiday recreation travel in the red line. So this is all part of this patchwork economy effect, that the business travel, business-related accommodation services are doing very well off those sectors of the Australian economy that are growing strongly. One of the indicators that's coming out of it is the implications for investment in the accommodation sector. Recent survey showing that investment in the Australian accommodation sector in this business class offers higher returns with lower risk profile than equivalent investments elsewhere in the world. So the patchwork economy, the resources boom, is having flow-on effects into the tourism sector, but that's not to say that we recognise that other parts are doing it tougher. The Tourism Forecasting Committee forecasting this gross value add to 36 billion, and employment still forecast to rise. Andrew's talked about what that means in terms of tracking towards the 2020 potential. We're at the bottom of this envelope, and that's hardly surprising when you think about the global economic conditions and the domestic issues that the sector has had to deal with. So we're watching this, we're going to keep reporting this, we're going to keep analysing this, we're going to keep figuring out what can we do to get our performance up into that zone, the unfortunate colour of beige, and look at that in terms of driving towards it. But this is the issue that's driving both the supply side and the demand side. What is the role of government working with industry, governments working with industry, to keep the sector working towards that potential? There were positives in there. Visitor expenditure grew in 7 markets: China, Korea, New Zealand, Singapore, Malaysia, India and Australian domestic, but it declined in 5: UK, USA, Japan, Germany, France. We canvassed the reasons for that. Our market share grew in China, held in 5 markets: Germany, Japan, New Zealand, France and Australia, but we lost in 6 markets: UK, US, India, South Korea, Singapore and Malaysia. Ministers have signed off on the need to be hard-nosed and realistic in reporting progress and using this all-important metric of, is the sector performing to its potential? Finally, I just want to talk a little bit about where to next with the National Long-Term Tourism Strategy. So I've said a lot of the analytical and research work and policy analysis work has now been completed. It's really now about implementation. This is going to involve, as ever for the tourism sector, all 9 governments, the tourism ministers talking to their ministerial colleagues, officials talking to our colleagues in other departments, because so many of the levers that we need to pull to make a difference in this area are not held by the tourism ministers. And so this continues to be a big task of working across 9 governments. And industry's active engagement in this and support for it is critical. I've talked about the communication challenge. I'm not a marketer, I'm more focused on the policy work and the robustness of the analysis, but the feedback we're getting is that we need to do a better job of basically marketing this strategy. And the reason is essentially to maintain industry engagement, to make sure we get it right. We know that what we've done so far on investment, what we've done on skills, what we've done on quality, we think they're a good start, but the strategy itself is dynamic. We can't presume that the initial policy analysis we did after the Jackson Review a couple of years ago is going to hold for 10 years. The markets move, the world moves on, the strategy will evolve. And as Mr. Ferguson's mentioned, the next evolution is tomorrow. Tourism ministers are meeting here in Canberra. They'll be receiving a more detailed report on what we've done and where to next in each of the areas that I've touched on. And they'll be looking at how the strategy can develop and what it will look like in the future. So, my message really is, I think, solid, analytical, robust work done, a couple of high points in terms of direct outcomes, but really moving in now to this implementation work, focusing on investment, skills and quality. And finally, to thank industry, thank our state and territory colleagues who have chaired much of the heavy lifting in this for your continuing engagement and support on the strategy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. We now have a few minutes before morning tea, and I thought we'd take the opportunity to invite Andrew and Jeff to the stage if I can now, and turn the house lights up. We've got microphones available in the audience to just really give you the opportunity, before we move on to other keynote speakers, to drill a little bit deeper into what's been happening with the long-term tourism strategy and to pursue some of the ideas that have been presented so far this morning. I'll jump aside here. If you have a question, please raise your hand and we'll get the microphones to you. There's a question in the middle of the room. Any more questions? We might take my question first, not that it's more important than that one, but keep thinking, keep raising your hand. We'll get another microphone to somebody over here. Is another question this side of the room? I'll give you a moment to think. Andrew, I just wanted to start by asking you, how much has Tourism Australia, to be blunt, sharpened up its efforts as a result of this reform process? Because reading one of the documents here, you really talked about having figured out which markets you're going for and then had the confidence to say, and what is the exact profile of the traveller that you're after. So how much has this changed your efforts?
Oh, look, I think incredibly. When you've got a goal and a target and you're being judged on it all the time, it really does focus you. And to Alan's point, there's a lot of granular detail underneath that. I think we better understand the consumer in each market that we're going for. I think we better understand what they read, what they watch, what they listen to, how they plan, research and buy holidays. And I think that's really has sharpened us up because with the goal, with the view that we have to be competitive and we have to do better than Canada, the USA, South Africa, Korea, any other destination, we're just trying to be a lot smarter about that stuff so that we can actually infiltrate that consumer much better. So I think it really has sharpened us up.
Okay, the question in the middle of the room now.
David Bierman, University of Technology, Sydney. A current theme that seemed to run through every presentation this morning was the growth in the Asian market. And I guess my question really relates to how well resourced is the industry and what are the efforts that, say, government and also to the promotional authorities are to train frontline staff in particular on Chinese languages, Hindustani, even though I know, Andrew, you mentioned that India was the biggest English-speaking country in the world, and that's very true, but a lot of Indians probably might be more comfortable being spoken to in Hindustani. Also to Korean, Malay, those other languages. So I think that's a really critical issue, and I'm just wondering what you would advise as the approach to dealing with that issue.
To Jeff's point, but I think the larger players in the industry are gearing up. We know that people like IHG and Accor, etc., have training programs with things like simplified Chinese, language brochures and food and all that sort of stuff. So the bigger companies are doing that. I know the smaller operators as well, and the department, through Drew and Jane Madden, released recently with TQual a grant, a strategic industry grant to actually help in the process of training and educating the Australians through to be better prepared for it. So it's a good question. There's a lot of work to be done, but I do think the building blocks are there in place. The bigger guys will do it as a matter of course, the airlines as well, Jeff will be doing that, and the smaller guys, I think there is help at hand for them to do it. And I would argue the university sector is pivotal to it and will play a really key role.
Yeah, I'd also add that the government can only do so much in an area like this. This gets down to competition for the customers that come in. And I think the big ones and then the smaller companies will obviously gear up to make sure they have the necessary facilities such as language and that to meet this demand. But to answer your question bluntly, obviously no one would be ready for it right now. But in most of these things, everything through human endeavour you will absolutely follow and hopefully catch up with the thrust of it as you go forward.
Right, we have a question down. Oh, okay, at the back of the room, and then we'll come to the front of the room after that.
Bruce Piper from Travel Daily. Andrew, and I'm down the back here. Yeah, right at the back.
Oh, yeah.
There we are. A couple of things. Just wanted to ask whether you could expand on, one of you mentioned the greater cooperation or with the state tourism authorities, and so what's behind that? Is that about promoting together in long-haul markets? And then the other question was just on the TripAdvisor TQual, if you could expand on that a bit. Thanks.
Sure. Jeff, you want to first go at one voice?
Yeah, our view is that we cooperate very, very closely already with the state tourism authorities, but it has as much come from our own readings and our own discussions with people around the world. It wasn't just in China and India and other places. We are a relatively small country when it comes to population and obviously resources, and we are being told all the time that people just do not know all the states and all the territories when people are trying to promote it overseas. We've had discussions. I sat down with all the chairmen and the CEOs, and so did Andrew, of the state bodies probably about 18 months ago. We talked about cooperation, and most of them, or all of them, matter of fact, quite willing to consider this. Already in places in the world we cohabit together, and more we are doing things together. But it comes down to just a stark reality. The fact is that we have quite not a diffused message, but a message about areas of Australia. And I think the message initially, and to make it very strong, is got to be about Australia itself. In other words, the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, not the Great Barrier Reef necessarily in Queensland. I think it's a stronger message, and it's one that resonates a lot more.
And TQual?
TQual and TripAdvisor. I think Simon Current's here, and he can probably talk in more detail than me and Jane, but yeah, as Minister Ferguson said, they're the biggest travel advisory site on earth, and there's a partnership with our to provide that travel advice through TQual. So beyond, I guess, industry self-regulating and looking at its products and processes and being the best they can be in terms of quality, it'll take consumer feedback on that as part of that process, which I think is a really big thing. That is advocacy. That is what the world of travel and tourism is today, and I think it's a fantastic initiative and a fantastic partnership.
There's a question here at the front of the room, so we'll take that question and back-to-back this question here from Chris Buckingham. Gentleman in the front.
Andrew, Jeff Buckley, KPMG. I was just reflecting on the chart that Drew had on forecasted visitor nights and the split between business and holiday. And I suppose the issue that's there is the almost 4-year slide in visitor nights in that holiday space. And what looks like a sudden turnaround in 2012 to show a real positive growth in that space from that period. And notwithstanding the forecast, I suppose I'm just interested in your gut in terms of what's going to drive that change to really start moving that holiday market again.
Look, I do think, Jeff, good to see Jeff at KPMG, and perhaps it gives me a chance to have a future beyond tourism. But, definitely, the good thing I think is that one thing I'd say up front is that all of these sectors growing is a good thing. The business community growing means our hotels are full, builds demand, the airlines are happier, growth capacity. So, we can't look at them in isolation, but I agree, Jeff, that holiday stuff in the last decade has dropped away a fair bit. Where we think the growth will come from, back to that Asia story, we don't think the UK and Europe and the Americas holiday visitation will grow significantly in the next 2 or 3, maybe 4 years, but we do see, given forward bookings, given what the wholesalers and retailers of the world are telling us, that markets like China, Indonesia, particularly Korea, Japan will come back, and we'll see the holiday bounce. And that's really, again, a story of the region. We think that's predicated on.
All right, final question here.
Thank you. I'm Jeff and Andrew, Chris Buckingham from Destination Melbourne. And Jeff, just want to say thank you so much for making a positive statement about the state of the industry and the offer that we have here. Yeah, I can stand up. The question I have, I understand that Tourism Australia's got a fairly comprehensive domestic marketing program underway. I'm just wondering how you see that marketing program potentially connecting with the visiting friends and relatives market over the longer term.
I think it does that right now. As you know, a lot of people hopefully would know we're running our next phase of There's Nothing Like Australia. We're asking you, the Australian people, to tell us in 25 words and with a great image why there's nothing like Australia. The new part of that initiative is build your dream team. You're going to win one of the luxury lodge holidays. Who would you take on that holiday? And I think, to your point, Chris, that's a VFR play. That is people telling their friends and relatives what's so good about the country. The other thing we did with that campaign last year, we translated 3,200 of the 30,000 images into 16 different languages. And again, it's a VFR play because it was Australians inviting the world to come to our place. Then we did it in markets like Singapore, New Zealand, Germany, Japan, China, where those people who've been to Australia were doing the recommendations to other people. So it's a really good question. I think forever this industry has tried to wrestle with the dilemma of how do you make VFR part of what we do. I think through social advocacy, that's happening now, and There's Nothing Like Australia is very much about that.
All right, we are right up against morning tea, but we'll use our IML. Oh, please thank Jeff and Andrew very much.
Just poke a number in your little IML machine. Having listened to the key speakers, how do you feel the Australian tourism industry is positioned for the Asian opportunity on a scale of 1 to 5? 1 being what? It's off the bottom. 1 being weak, 5 being strong. How well positioned are we? 1 being weak, 5 being strong. Let's play that theme show music, game show music. Wish I'd gone high. All right. 45% think all right. Only 1% think we're well positioned. That's interesting, but the majority of people think that we are quite well positioned to take advantage of it. That's an interesting result. Thank you for that. We will now break for 10 minutes for morning tea.